Hello, good morning from Sydney. My name's Lloyd and I'm a Viking host down here in Sydney, Australia. I'm not originally from Sydney, I'm originally from London and I've lived here for 14 years. Today, I'd like to show you why I love this city so much. And I want to show you some of the special places and some of the secret places that I know about and that I would love you to see. So I've just walked into the Royal Botanic Gardens here by the Harbour in Sydney. This is the oldest scientific institution in Australia and one of the most important botanical institutions in the world alongside Kew Gardens. It's full of the most beautiful Australian flora and fauna and also the most incredible non-Australian trees as well. It's a wonderful place to walk around, spend 2 or 3 hours. They do an Aboriginal walk around here as well. And as you can see, the backdrop looking over the harbour, the bridge, the Opera House and the ever-changing skyline of the city is spectacular. One of my favourite things to do here in Sydney is to stop off after a walk and get one of the finest coffees in the world. That's why we have the finest coffees in the world here in Australia. And I'm actually just on the edge of the Botanic Gardens at a beautiful cafe here. There's a couple of cafes in the Botanic Gardens where if you walk around, you just stop off and you can enjoy a latte or a cappuccino or a flat white in a very Australian way. We're also right opposite the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which is a beautiful art gallery which has my favourite sculpture actually. It's a sculpture of James Cook, which is in the gallery. Cook, of course, was here in 1770 and he basically mapped the coastline of the eastern seaboard of Australia that set the ball rolling, I guess, for the British to come down here with their convicts in 18 years later. So I'm looking out at this incredible view of the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, and I think about it's only in the recent modern history that the British settled here in 1788. The Indigenous people, the Aboriginal people, you can imagine what they must have felt when the men, women and children were just working along this landscape when they saw the 11 ships of the First Fleet come in here on the 26th of January 1788. It must have been really scary for them. But this is where it all started from a British point of view. And when you think about it, it's only something like 230 years ago. It's not that long ago in the scheme of things. A great way to get around Sydney is on one of the many ferries that crisscross their way across the harbour. The one actually just in the distance, the yellow and green one, is a Manly ferry. It's come from Manly, which is a 30-minute ferry ride. And it's actually my favourite ferry ride. And one of my favourite things to do in Sydney is to jump on a Manly ferry and just watch the city from the harbour as we meander our way across to the other side into the beautiful oceanside town of Manly. So here I am at Mrs. Macquarie's chair on Mrs. Macquarie's Point. Mrs. Macquarie was the second wife of arguably our most important and influential early governor of New South Wales, Lachlan Macquarie, who was here between 1810 and 1821. And it's said that she used to look out towards the ocean because she was homesick and she looked for ships to come in from Britain, which made her feel better. So eventually her husband got some of the convicts to actually carve out from the sandstone a chair here. And that's why it's called Mrs. Macquarie's chair. I'm standing in front of the Sydney Opera House, one of the most beautiful, iconic buildings in the world and certainly one of the most recognisable. I remember when I first saw this, when I visited here in 2000, how excited I was, and I have the same feeling every time I show guests this incredible building. It was opened in 1973, but the story is actually quite a sad one. They actually started building it in the late 50s, early 60s, and the architectural competition was won by a Danish architect, an unknown Danish architect called Jørn Utzon, who actually had never been to Sydney before he started designing this building. He came to Sydney, started designing it, they started building it, and unfortunately he left in the mid-60s when there was a change of government, and Jørn Utzon never actually got to see the final Opera House. He never came back to Sydney to see the final Opera House. But this is one of my favourite places to take people. I love it. I love bringing my family here. It's absolutely superb. These are two of my favourite characters in Australian history. I'm standing in front of Matthew Flinders, who was a captain in the British Royal Navy and came over as a young man in the late 1700s. And he was the first man to circumnavigate and map the coastline of what we now know as Australia. Indeed, he was the man to coin the name Australia. Indeed, that map is actually behind me in the State Library of New South Wales. Matthew Flinders was a great man, very brave man. And actually, come with me, I'm going to show you who his very best friend was. Now, I love animals. Myself and my wife have 2 cats, so we love animals, but follow me. This is Trim. Trim was his best friend. Trim was a little black and white cat, which Flinders and Trim were absolutely inseparable. They went everywhere together. So Flinders may have been the first man to map the coastline and circumnavigate Australia, but Trim was the first cat to circumnavigate Australia. Standing on one of the oldest streets in Sydney, Macquarie Street, named after our 5th governor, Lachlan Macquarie, and we're outside the Rum Hospital. This is a series of 3 buildings, basically called the Rum Hospital because it was built on the proceeds of alcohol. In the early days of the colony, there was no coinage, no Australian money. Most of it used to leave the shores, so people used to deal in alcohol and used to get paid in alcohol. And this hospital was built in around about 1815, 1816, on the proceeds of rum. These days, it's still a hospital. It's the oldest hospital in Australia. But the northern end, to my left, is the Parliament House, and on the right-hand side, the southern end, is what is now the Mint. It was the first overseas branch of the British Royal Mint that was put there to make coinage during the gold rush, the great gold rush here in the mid-1800s. So I love to learn about the history, the fascinating history of Sydney and Australia. And one of the most important characters in our British history of Australia is this man here, Lachlan Macquarie, who I've mentioned, our 5th governor. As I said, he was here between 1810 and 1821, and he was the man who was probably more responsible for changing the course of this city's history and the country's history from a town to a city. He was going against the British government in terms of he wanted to build a big grand hospital, because every grand city needs a grand hospital and grand avenues. The British government turned around and said, we're not sending any money over, which is why he gave the job to some Sydney-siders here who lived in the city, and he paid them with, or he gave them the rights to the alcohol trade in the city. One of the things I love to do is to come down to Hyde Park, which is where I'm standing now on a summer's weekend, and go to one of the many festivals that we have here, like the Food Festival amongst others. Hyde Park is actually the oldest park, or at least the oldest equal park in Australia. It's the site of the first horse race, the first cricket match, and it's named after Hyde Park in London. It always makes me laugh how many, being both British and Australian, how many things are named after British places here in Australia, given the huge rivalry between England and Australia. And behind me is St Mary's Cathedral, the site of this cathedral, the second coming of the cathedral. The first one burnt down, but this is the home of Catholicism in Sydney. And you can see these towers on the right hand side here. These two towers were only added to the building in the year 2000, the year of the Sydney Olympics. And over on the left hand side, you'd never believe that we're actually in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the Southern Hemisphere when you're standing in Hyde Park, because you could just be in the countryside. You can't really, you can hear a small, like a slight buzz of the city, and you can be right in the heart of the city within a 2-minute walk. But just standing here, one of the charming things about this beautiful park is that, I suppose a bit like Central Park in New York, you don't realise you're in a huge city. As we look up William Street, we can see the infamous Coca-Cola sign at King's Cross in the background there. Now, King's Cross is an interesting district. It's the old red light district of Sydney, but it's been cleaned up somewhat, and some would say a little bit too much, because a few years ago the state government brought in some lock-in laws. Up until then, you could go to for a drink in King's Cross and you could stay out till 4 or 5 in the morning. You could even roll back at 7 in the morning. But after a little bit of trouble up in the King's Cross area, the government decided that they would bring in a law that would you'd have to be in a pub by a certain time. I think it was either midnight or 1 a.m. to actually order your last drink. So they really cut things back, and it's actually destroyed a lot of the businesses in the area. Actually, a lot of the big bars, a lot of the big clubs have closed and unfortunately aren't up there. So the vibe up in King's Cross isn't what it was. Standing in Hyde Park, which is full of the most incredible statues and memorials, and one in particular I love. It's the statue of Captain Cook, just to my left here, which looks out towards the harbour. Cook came here in 1770 on his ship, the Endeavour, on this great exploration of the Southern Seas, searching for the imaginary land Terra Australis Incognita. And he arrived in Botany Bay, which is just to the south of us here in Sydney, where our international airport is based now. And he was travelling with a guy called Joseph Banks, who was a very affluent British man and also an incredible botanist. And Banks got off the ship and collected a whole load of plants and trees and artefacts, and that's why they called Botany Bay. It was actually called Botanist Bay. But I love this statue of Captain James Cook, who was here in 1770 and, as I say, was the precursor to the British settlement originally, or the British settlement that was here started in 1788. One of those beautiful memorials in Hyde Park is behind me, the Anzac Memorial. Anzac stands for Australia New Zealand Army Corps, two armies who fought together predominantly during the two Great World Wars. And this beautiful pool of reflection offers this amazing reflection of the Anzac Memorial in the water. One of the things I love about the architecture in Sydney is these beautiful sandstone buildings behind me. We've got the town hall here, which is based on a very sort of French Hotel de Ville, a town hall. And then over here, behind me over there, is the Queen Victoria building. Both these buildings are made of sandstone. Sydney's actually built on sandstone, which made it very difficult for the first settlers to farm on, in fact almost impossible in the late 1700s. But what it did do in the 1800s is it created the opportunity to build some of these most incredibly impressive sandstone buildings. Now we're looking down towards George Street. Used to be a street where you could drive along, but not these days. Since January we've had the new tram running up and down it, which is absolutely fantastic. Great way of getting from the northern part of the central part of the city to the southern part and further. And I always say to people when I tell them it was unfortunately quite a lot over budget and over time, but now it's built and it's running. It's a fantastic asset to our city. Oh, I love animals and I love statues of animals, and there's quite a few of them around Sydney. This is another one. This is Queen Victoria's dog Islay on its hind legs just outside the Queen Victoria building. Inside the Queen Victoria building, this beautiful piece of architecture, we've got two very historic clocks. The one we're looking at now is the British clock, and on the other side we've got an Australian clock. But this clock is absolutely magnificent. Indeed, the Queen Victoria building is a place that you can come along. It's one of those beautiful arcades we've got here, probably the most beautiful arcade in Australia, I'd say, although a lot of Melburnians may argue about that. But this is a place where you can come and just smoosh around the beautiful boutiques and shops, know you're going to get great quality products, and also have an amazing coffee or sandwich at one of the cafes that dot the inside of this incredible building. It's always great coming down to Chinatown and having a Chinese meal at one of the many Chinese restaurants behind me. But believe me, this is a very multicultural city. It's one of the beauties of the city, the amount of different restaurants and types and styles of food that you can get here in this city. Chinese, Japanese, Malaysian, Vietnamese, the list just keeps going on. So it is one of the beauties of this city. But this is Chinatown. It's the third incarnation of a Chinatown in Sydney. The other two were a little bit further north, one by the rocks. But this is a fantastic area and a very vibrant area to come to in the evening. It's also nice to stop after a long walk and have a bit of the old amber nectar, a beer, to refresh the old taste buds. One of these many pubs that we've got here in Sydney. Very much a pub culture here in Sydney. So I'm on Pyrmont Bridge at Darling Harbour. It's another one of our harbours named after one of our early governors, Ralph Darling, and there really is so much development going on here, not just here at Darling Harbour, but also in Sydney. Behind me, you can see the new casino building going up, which is going to be a casino, a 6-star hotel, and residences as well. That beautiful building there. Just behind over here to the right is the new area of Barangaroo, which is a huge development. 9 years ago, there was absolutely nothing here. It was totally flat. And this just shows how much development is going on here in Sydney. It's a new financial services centre of Sydney. Just behind us is Darling Harbour here. We've got a new W Hotel going up here. A new Sofitel, only a couple of years old. And that's also just over in this direction over here is the new International Convention Centre, which has really put Sydney on the map in terms of holding massive conventions and conferences, the new ICC Sydney that was only opened a couple of years ago. So this is a map of Circular Quay from the year 1808, around about 20 years after the first fleet of 11 ships arrived in this area. And you can see the amount of buildings that were around the harbour. In fact, later on I'm going to go and show you some areas of the Rocks, which is the oldest part of Sydney, just to the western side of Circular Quay over here. And this is where all the convicts were put in the very early days of settlement. And then the quay itself, you can see a stream. You can see this stream. I'll show my foot running here. This is called the tank stream because they called it that because this is where they built tanks to store the water in the sandstone tanks. But it is also the reason for the city of Sydney being here, because there was fresh water running into the harbour here, which meant that they could build a city or a town at that time around it. I'm here now at the International Passenger Terminal, which is where the big cruise ships normally come in. And behind me is one of the other iconic structures that this city has to offer. Something that I was really excited to see when I first came here in 2000. Of course, it's the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and it is an absolutely incredible structure. You can actually climb across it. You can climb halfway up this nearest arch if you want, and then cross over and climb down the other arch. But that's if you're scared of heights. You can also walk across it. You can drive across it, and you can take a train across it. You can even ride a bike across it. So there's many ways to utilise getting across the bridge. Built between the years 1923 and 1932 during the Great Depression, it gave so much work to so many needy people here, it became known as the Iron Lung. These days in Sydney, we affectionately call it the coat hanger. And it is, of course, the centrepiece to a lot of our celebrations, including that I'm sure many of you have seen during New Year's Eve. So this is a great vantage point, not only to see the Opera House from here, but looking across to the area of Kirribilli, just behind the ferry here. It's an Aboriginal word. It actually means good fishing spot. And it's a beautiful, beautiful little suburb over the northern side of the harbour. Well, I've spoken about a couple of other animals today. This is the third of one of our iconic animals here in Sydney. His name is Biggles. He's a beautiful dog that lived here between 1980 and 1994 in this little street here, and he was such a friend and such a great member of the community here that they actually made a statue for him. So I love showing my guests this amazing little dog, Biggles. And I wish I'd have known him myself, because he looks like a really cute dog. So this is an area I absolutely love. It's called the Rocks. It's the oldest part of Sydney. It's called the Rocks because when the first fleet arrived and the convicts got off the ship, they were put on this side of Circular Quay. And it was quite literally a hilly outcrop of rocks. So they called it the Rocks. And I'm actually standing on Playfair Street, which is named after a really interesting guy, a guy called Thomas Playfair, who was a ship's providore. In other words, he was a butcher to the ships. And he was also an old mayor of Sydney, a really good man. And this street in the Rocks, one of the main streets in the Rocks, is named after him, Playfair Street. Now follow me, I'm going to show you a little bit of a secret. Follow me up these steps. We're going to go and see a place where most Sydney-siders don't even know exists. It's called Foundation Park. It's an art installation. And it's actually of some old houses that used to be here at the top, and it gives you an example of well, how many people used to live in these houses. So follow me and I'll show you what I mean. They were very small. They used to have a father, a mother and many kids in these houses up here. So the furniture, the way the artist has done it, he's made the furniture look really big. But here you have an old bath. Now take into account that the family used to have a bath once a week. So you can imagine the father used to go first. Maybe he'd been down at the docks all week. He was really dirty. Followed by his wife, followed by maybe 4 kids. By the time the baby got into the bath, that water was absolutely disgusting. And that's why they call it throwing out the bath water with the baby. There's many iconic pubs in Sydney. This is one of them, the Australian Hotel. And it's probably most famous for being able to get a coat of arms pizza. Now on our coat of arms we have the kangaroo and the emu. So this is a pizza with kangaroo and emu on. I've never tried it, never really want to try it, but that's the pizza they do here. There are many other iconic pubs and old pubs in Sydney. There's even a story of one of them. In the old times, this was such a place of debauchery, drunkenness and fun. A lot of the sailors didn't want to leave, so the ships were leaving with less sailors than they should have on them. So what they used to do, one of the pubs here, it's said, and I'm not sure how true this is, the hero of Waterloo, is that they used to either drug or get the sailor so drunk that he was completely paralytic and out of it, and then they used to take him through a tunnel to the ship so that by the time he woke up on the ship in the morning it was safely out of the harbour and they couldn't get off. And that was one way they got the sailors onto the ship. It's called being totally shanghaied. Now this is a place I wouldn't have wanted to be in the 1800s. Underneath the Argyle Cut, which is actually the main bridge or the main road above us towards the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But in the old days there was a lot of push gangs in Sydney, and those push gangs started off life quite innocently, just tilting a man's hat off their head. But then it got a bit more violent. There's actually a story of a man who was walking down from the church at the end here, and he was walking down in darkness. The only bit of light was from some gas light, one of these gas lights here, okay? And he walked into one of these push gangs, and suddenly one of the push gang members actually recognised him as a lawyer who got off one of his friends a couple of years before, and said to him, look, never ever walk down this path alone at night again, because next time you may not be so lucky. He was within an inch of his life. How lucky was that, hey? You didn't want to bump into a push gang in those days. So I'm now in Watson's Bay, which is the last of the bays on the southern side of the harbour, right up by the Pacific Ocean. As you can see here, we've got the beautiful harbour here with a ferry, a Sydney ferry. It's easy to get on a ferry and just come from Circular Quay to Watson's Bay in around about 20 to 25 minutes. And the reason it's so great here is because, again, it's almost like you're not in a big city. This is a little hamlet, I could say, at the end of the peninsula, which is just such a great place to go for some amazing walks up to South Head, and just to enjoy maybe a pint at the local pub or some amazing fish and chips. As you saw, I was just having some fish and chips there at the iconic Doyle's restaurant, or Doyle's on the Wharf. This is one of my favourite places to come, just to look out across the Pacific Ocean or the Tasman Sea and just take in the beautiful fresh air, listening to the birds. go for a walk. This walk goes all the way from Bondi Beach all the way around to Manly. It would take a long time, admittedly, to do that walk, but it's a great walk and there's some fantastic views. And you can just spot this beautiful sandstone cliff here. Remember earlier I was talking about the sandstone buildings in Sydney, the beautiful sandstone buildings. It's because Sydney's built on sandstone, and no better example of how it's built on sandstone than here at Watson's Bay. So from this vantage point and many vantage points along the New South Wales coast at this time of year, you can spot whales travelling from the south towards the north, going up towards Queensland to give birth to their young before they start coming back down to go to Antarctica in the summer. And there's lots of whale watching boats out there. This is one of the things you can do here in Sydney at this time of year, in many parts of the year actually, seeing them go one way or the other. It's a truly fascinating sight to see these amazing creatures in the water. This is one of my favourite birds. It's called the laughing kookaburra. It wakes me up every morning. They are so beautiful. I love its little chest and its beak. They are so cute. But when they sing, it sounds like they're laughing, which is why they're called laughing kookaburras. And you can actually find them all over Sydney. Look, he's looking at me. He's so beautiful. Or she. So you can just see the bird up there through the leaves. It's a rainbow lorikeet, the most colourful of birds. Green, red, yellow, absolutely beautiful bird. The rainbow lorikeet, that is. Another local bird found around here. So we're at the Gap, and we're literally only about 20 minutes outside of the CBD, the Central Business District, the city centre. And as I look out across the Pacific Ocean, for those of you watching in the United States, if you go around 7,500 miles in that direction, you will get to Los Angeles. And if you look over the other side, this head here, North Head, that is all national park. It's an environmentally friendly zone. We have a lot of them, a lot of green zones here, not just in Sydney, but throughout the whole of Australia. And that's another fantastic place to go and see sweeping views across the harbour into the city. So we're now in my local area here in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and I've brought you to one of my favourite views across the harbour and towards the city. You can see the beautiful skyline of the city of Sydney in the distance. You can see the huge amount of greenery that makes up this city as well. And in fact, beyond the bridge, you can also see, today it's a really clear day, you can see the Blue Mountains, which is about an hour and a half's drive west of us here, which is a beautiful day trip that I love to go up to the Blue Mountains every once in a while. This bay here is Rose Bay, just in the foreground. It's the first international airport in Australia. Seaplanes used to fly all the way from here through Sydney to the United Kingdom in the 1930s. So here we are at the world famous, one of the most iconic beaches in the world, Bondi Beach. The reason it is so famous is we are only about probably 10 kilometres from the city centre, so it's easy to get here. And this is a semicircular beach. It's got amazing waves. The surfers absolutely love it out here. And also, it's famous for being the home of the television series Bondi Rescue. Some of you may have seen it. But we have the yellow and red flags out on the beach. That's where people can swim from. And it truly is fantastic, just breathing in this fresh ocean air, especially today. It's a fresh, windy day, winter's day. It's absolutely beautiful here, and I love it. And it's only about a 20-minute walk from where I live. So here I am, standing on Bondi Beach. on this beautiful sand, this long strip of sand along the beach. And I come down here just to sit on the sand, read a book sometimes. You can come down, you can have a barbecue, and one of the many barbecues along the ocean beaches here as well. You can sit in the park, but the beauty about this place is you just listen to those beautiful waves of the Pacific Ocean. It really is fantastic. I've really enjoyed showing you, I guess, just a quick introduction about my beautiful city, Sydney. And we're really looking forward to welcoming you back to this city so that we can show you more and you can experience it yourself, because I know that you're going to love it as much as I do. So thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you soon. Hi there, it's Lloyd in Sydney. I hope you enjoyed my short video about this beautiful city, and I wanted to answer some of your questions that are coming through at the moment, so that you guys have more information, and hopefully it's whet your taste buds, and we'll be seeing you soon. Anyway, the first question is from Linda in Seattle, and she's asking whether the Sydney Botanical Gardens, the Royal Botanic Gardens, are free to enter. Yes, they are. They are free. I always suggest to my guests spending a couple of hours wandering around this incredible scientific institution. It's full of the most beautiful indigenous trees and plants, sculptures. There's an exhibition in there as well, which is currently showing, I think the exhibition is What's in Bloom, but it's done things like pollination in the past. There's cafes in there, there's wildlife in there in terms of birds. So it's a great place to spend 2 or 3 hours just to walk around, and it is totally free, Linda. The Aboriginal walk, there is a charge for that, and that's fascinating as well. But it's well worth it. Anybody who comes to Sydney should take a walk around the Botanic Gardens. Beverly in Toledo is asking, would you call Sydney or the UK your home? It's a good question. I've lived here now for nearly 14 years, and I definitely, if push came to shove, I'd definitely call Sydney my home. Although whenever I go back to the UK, it feels like going home as well. But I guess the answer is very much Sydney. Evelyn in Houston asked, the coffee you were drinking in the gardens, how much would a coffee cost? Generally around about $4 here in Sydney, which is about $3 US. We are really passionate about our coffee here. The baristas are passionate about making it, and whether it's a flat white, a latte, a cappuccino, you name it. I think we have some of the best coffee in the world here in Australia, and I love having a coffee every morning. I really enjoy it, as do most Aussies. Lynette in Essex, near my neck of the woods, asked, how much does it cost to walk the Sydney Harbour Bridge? Have you ever done it? I have done it once, and it was absolutely incredible. I do get a little bit of height sickness, or a lot of height sickness, but I was okay. You're chained on. It costs around about $300 to $350 normally. I think they're doing some sort of deals at the moment during the COVID times where it's slightly cheaper, but normally it's around about $300 to $350. It takes about 4 hours to do, and it is an incredible experience. Great views. When I did it, it was a really windy day, so you go up the southeastern pylon and you go to the middle, and then you cross over to the southwestern pylon and then come down, or arch I should say, not pylon, southwestern arch, and you come down that side. It was really windy, and it hits you when you go over to the other side, the western side. So I thought I was going to get blown off, but it's well worth it. It takes about 4 hours to do, and it's a fantastic experience. Okay, so Brian in Detroit, question coming through. Thank you for showing us Sydney. I hope to visit one day. We hope to see you. Do you know how many lives were lost building the Sydney Harbour Bridge? Yeah, there were 16. Incredibly, during the period of building between 1923 and 1932, considering the lack of work health and safety in building the bridge, and what the men had to do, getting up there and hanging off pylons and all sorts of things. There was only 16 people who lost their lives, and I think it was only 2 lost their lives falling off the bridge. Others lost their lives in some of the works to the side, I think in Milson's Point, which is just to the north. But when you think of, as I say, the lack of work health safety in those days, 16 too many, but it could have been many, many more. Dev in Los Angeles. Hi Dev, you're asking whether you can swim at Manly Beach. Absolutely you can. Manly is an incredible beach, very long, golden, sandy beach. Lots of surfers, lots of swimmers. One of the best beaches at Manly. When you get to the main beach, if you turned right and just walked about 15-20 minutes, you get to a beach called Shelley Beach, and that's a much more closed-in beach, much more intimate. There's a great restaurant there as well. You can dive there, and it's a fantastic beach. And Manly Beach is just great. I love going to Manly. One of my favourite things to do is get on the Manly ferry and travel half an hour from Circular Quay, which is in the centre of Sydney, on the ferry, and you get to the harbour side of Manly. You walk about 5 minutes down a little street called the Corso, which connects the harbour to the ocean side, and it's spectacular. Great restaurants, great half day or day out in Manly. You wouldn't even know you're in one of the biggest cities in the Southern Hemisphere, because it just feels like you're in this beachside town, and it's well worth it. So yes, you can swim there, Dev. Ryan in Seattle is asking, can you see the Opera House from Mrs. Macquarie's chair? Absolutely you can. One of the best views in the city of Sydney is from Mrs. Macquarie's chair. And you can see not only the Opera House, but also the Harbour Bridge. You can see right over to the other side at Kirribilli, which is one of the little tiny villages just below the Harbour Bridge on the northern side. And you can almost see out towards Manly, near where the ocean is. So great sweeping views of the harbour at Mrs. Macquarie's chair, and definitely you can see the Opera House clearly and well. Nick in Ottawa in Canada is asking what is inside the Sydney Opera House. Well, the Sydney Opera House, first of all, one of the first things I say to my guests when they arrive is, in your free time, do not miss the 1 hour tour of the Opera House, because it is absolutely spectacular. It is unmissable, and it is well worth doing. There's 2 massive auditoriums, the concert hall and the Joan Sutherland Theatre. The concert hall is being... That's my cat, sorry. The concert hall is actually being renovated at the moment. It's a $200 million renovation, which is taking place at the moment, which is due to be finished in next year, middle of next year. Actually, because the Opera House obviously is closed during COVID times, it is quite convenient that they're actually doing these renovations at the moment, and they're to improve the accessibility, some of the sound, logistics, etc. around the Opera House. We do have the Jones Sutherland Theatre as well. That's around about 2,700 seat theatre. So both those theatres are amazing. There's some smaller theatres in the Opera House and over 1,000 rooms in there. It is well worth going in there. It has a fantastic history, as I mentioned, including that of the Danish architect Jon Utzon and the Utzon family. So if you do come to Sydney, Nick, it's got to be first on your list is a 1 hour tour of the Opera House. James in Boston's asking, is it expensive in Sydney? House prices, cost of living? It is expensive. It's an expensive city. That's balanced with the high salaries that we have, but there is a high cost of living. It is a wonderful lifestyle, very much an outside lifestyle, but house prices, obviously if you've got a view over the harbour or a river or the ocean, there is a dividend, and a big one at that. The further west you go out, the cheaper the property gets, James. But and the cost of living, groceries are not cheap. But as I say, that is balanced with the, to a certain extent, with the salaries that are offered here in Australia. Charlie in Atlanta is asking, how long did it take for Matthew Flinders to travel around Australia? Well, he circumnavigated Australia, I think it was 1802, 1803. It was about a year to circumnavigate. He travelled with a guy called Bungaree and, of course, Trim the cat. He also hit the southern shores on one of his trips back from the UK as well. So, but in terms of circumnavigating, it was about a year, Charlie. Jude, why did Matthew Flinders die? That's Jude in Newark, New Jersey. Well, he died of kidney disease, a young man at 40. He'd been back in Britain. Just to mention that on his final voyage back to Britain with Trim, he got imprisoned on the French island nation of Mauritius. And the French and the British weren't great friends at the time. And the governor of Mauritius took a bit of a dislike to him. So he got imprisoned. He was there for 7 long years. When he got back to Britain, he managed to write some papers called A Voyage to Terra Australis. But he died a young man at 40 from kidney disease. They say it was maybe from something like gonorrhea when he was travelling in the Pacific, but he was only a young man at 40. And indeed, he was buried near London Euston Station. And only last year or the year before that, they were having an archaeological dig and they found the remains of Matthew Flinders. Amazingly, over 200 years after his death, they found the remains of this great man, this great explorer, Matthew Flinders, in London. And fittingly, there's many statues of Flinders. I think there's more Flinders than any other man in Australia. But outside London Euston Station, there is a statue of Flinders and Trim as well on a map of Australia. Joanna in Plano, is it Plano in Texas? Hope I pronounced that right. My husband and I are also cat lovers. How did Trim the cat die? Well, Trim went everywhere with Flinders. They were inseparable. And on the final voyage that I was talking about, when Flinders was imprisoned in Mauritius, unfortunately, Trim went walkabout very early on, and he was never seen again. Flinders, I don't believe, ever got over this. He was heartbroken. You can see it in some of his writings about Trim, but it's a terribly sad story and a great story. I guess if you're an animal lover, cat lover, dog lover, you would understand the bonds between an owner and the animal. And Flinders and Trim was one of the great love stories, I guess you can say. A wonderful, wonderful story. So I don't think Flinders ever really got over it. James in Toledo is asking what problems did Flinders face. Well, look, when he was over here, when he was circumnavigating and exploring, he was travelling with Bungaree, the Aboriginal man, and I think one of the problems he would have been dealing with the indigenous people, and obviously Bungaree would have helped him with that. But circumnavigating Australia would have been difficult. The conditions would have been an issue as well. So I would imagine that Flinders in those days would have had a number of issues and problems that he would have had to deal with. But he was an incredible man, and that's his legacy. It's the map, which is in the State Library of New South Wales, was the first man to circumnavigate the coastline of Australia, the first British Europeans to circumnavigate the coastline, to actually change the name from Terra Australis to first call it Australia because it was easier on the tongue, was Flinders. So he leaves behind this incredible legacy. Julia in Manchester, up there, a Mancunian in England. What is the Mint building now used for? The Mint is obviously was part of the original Rum Hospital. It's been used since then for courthouses. Now it's used as the home of Sydney Living Museums. It's their head office. You can also wander around there. There's some fantastic exhibitions. Great building to look at. In the past, it has been used as courthouses and offices, but well worth just walking up Macquarie Street anyway is well worth it. Looking at the historic buildings on Macquarie Street. But and of course, it was the Royal Mint as well, the first overseas branch of the British Mint. So hopefully that answers your question, Julia. Jason in Durham, how does Hyde Park, Sydney compare to Hyde Park in London? They're both parks. I think really that's where it ends. They're both in the centre of their cities, although Hyde Park much bigger. It has a massive lake, the Serpentine, big park, whereas Hyde Park, named after Hyde Park in London, much smaller, not so wide, not so long. It's longer than wider. Has lots of really interesting memorials, the Anzac Memorial, many others, and sculptures. Great to walk around. A lot of Sydney-siders have their lunch in the park. You can be having lunch there and not realise you're in this massive city because of the cover of the trees. But it's a fantastic park. Great statue of James Cook in there as well. And a wonderful fountain, the Archibald Fountain. Greg, what season is it in Sydney right now? Winter, hence the cardigan. Having said that, I mean, winter here, we get temperatures. Looking outside, it's probably going to be, probably reaches 21 today, 20 degrees. It does get cold at night. If you go out to the mountains, about 90 minutes west of us, the Blue Mountains, it gets below freezing. But in the not so distant future, in a few days' time, it's going to be spring. The 1st of September is spring here in Sydney, so things will start to get warmer. But I'm glad to say we've had a lot of rain because, as you all know, we had these massive fires last season, and we need as much rain as possible, not just for the fires, but also to fill the reservoir, which is which is pretty full at the moment. So that's good news. Lindsay in San Diego is saying, wow, the Sydney skyline's incredible. Thank you for a brilliant tour of the city. I can see why you love it so much. Lindsay, we would love to see you down here so that you can experience it yourself. It is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. There's lots to do down here, and we can't wait to see you. So thank you very much. And finally, Maddie in Cheltenham in the UK is asking whether I have any family back in the UK. Yes, I do. I have my sister and my nephew back in the UK, and other family. I'm happy to say my niece lives here in Sydney, and of course, obviously, I'm here with my wife, Elaine. I always said it was the 3 F's that I miss most about the UK, and that's family, friends, and football, soccer to you in the UK, in America. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question. So that brings us to the end. I don't think there's any more questions, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I speak on behalf of, I believe on behalf of all the hosts down here in, not just in Sydney, but in Australia. We look forward to seeing you back here in this incredible country, an incredible region, and so that you can enjoy these amazing Australian experiences that we have to offer. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot.